And I think that's a nice segue into actually looking at market access and also sort of pricing issues, etc. I mean, Wills, you kind of mentioned it earlier on, but I mean, could you sort of just explain what are the sort of the challenges for obtaining reimbursement for the sort of treatments for these orphan diseases?
Many and varied. I think the first thing that we have to say is very often the products are approved on a relatively small data set. And that's logical. The diseases are rare. That means the patients are rare, which means that you tend to have small numbers in your data set at the time of marketing authorization. So that might be enough to satisfy a risk-benefit analysis in a regulator's mind, and you could get a marketing authorization. But then when you take the same data set to an HTA body, a health technology assessment body, or to a reimbursement agency, they might say, that's very nice, but I can't make a decision based on that. And so you end up with this situation where you've been through the whole decision-making process in the company, you've shortened maybe the development cycle, you've been collaborative with regulators, you've talked to the patients, you've achieved your marketing authorization, and you're still not getting the treatment to the patients. And that's disastrous. It's disastrous for everybody because, as Hansa said, the patients are dying. In many cases, the patients are dying while they're waiting for these treatment. But also, you've got maybe 10, 12, 15 or more years of research, development, investment that has gone into making that moment of a successful achievement of a marketing authorization. But then not to be able to get that approved product to the patient means all of that is completely wasted. So in the same way that we've got to have a change in approach towards research, a collaborative approach towards development, not a partnership, but a collaboration, a dialogue with the regulators, we've got to now move to having that same dialogue and that same conversation with the payers to help them understand what difference this is going to make to the patients, to help them understand what it means not to have this treatment. I think, again, can only be done by an ongoing dialogue, an ongoing partnership approach.
I think you're right, Wilson. I think it's not just about death. I think it's about 1,000 little deaths along the way, because as these patients with rare disorders lose skills, they lose walking, they lose moving their arms, they lose the ability to breathe, these are little deaths along the way. The real death is eventual as well, but these little deaths impact the quality of life of everyone around them. And the financial impact they have to see is, it's not necessarily just about this drug and the access to the drug, it's the financial impact of the disease course on the family. Someone has to quit their job, someone has to take care of the patient. There's a ripple effect. Patients who are at once middle-class patients lose all of their resources just by buying equipment for these patients. So I think the payers have to understand that it is not just the price of a drug delivered to a patient. It is the impact, the economic impact of a disease course on the rest of their lives and everyone their lives touch.
Yeah. I think what we need to do now, probably we're far too late, but if we don't start, we'll never get there, is start having that dialogue with the HTA bodies, with the payers, to help them understand what it is that we're talking about, what it is that you're talking about, what it is that all the companies and the stakeholders involved are talking about. And say, if society did take a decision, and I think we have, that patients suffering from rare diseases deserve the same quality of care as patients suffering from more common diseases, if we as a society have taken that decision, what does that then mean when we start to look at what we're prepared to pay, how we're prepared to pay it, how do we do the evaluation? Because I think we can all agree that standard methodologies are unlikely to give us the answers that we need. But saying that's not enough, we then have to, we can't just say no, we don't like this, we then have to come with a new proposal. And from my perspective, I think having that open door conversation with the HTA bodies and with the payers to help figure out together what we are going to do is the most urgent thing that needs to happen now.
And Wills, I was just going to say, Wills, I'm very encouraged because I think that dialogue is beginning, and you may be aware that Agnes, which is the advisory group for National Specialized Services in the UK, has recently, I think, recognized that ultra-orphan drugs are not like conventional drugs, and they really can't be assessed in the same way. And we're very privileged to be invited to join with them in this, in a pilot exercise to really look in partnership with them at, okay, how would you look at and assess an ultra-orphan drug? So I think that I'm encouraged, I would say, that I think that process is beginning, and I think there's a lot more that industry can do to try to encourage that.
So that's to develop sort of econometric methods that would be fit for purpose for orphan diseases. Of course, the ironic thing is that there seems to be no sort of consistent agreed method for any kind of health technology assessment across the world, depending on which country you go to. So you mentioned that's going on in the UK. I mean, just
in England in particular.
Are there any other examples where you sort of see that kind of dialogue where there is a belief that actually these are special cases and therefore should be treated as such?
Well, the French have a great example with their so-called ATU system, which is quite rare in Europe still, as a matter of fact, but where the French government has decided that even prior to marketing authorization, patients already can get reimbursed access to the innovative fruits of R&D. And that's, I would say, a rare example of where patient access really is dealt with in a way that companies will get some reimbursement already at the beginning for very isolated patient groups, but that the patients in the highest need do get access, because that's really what it's about. In average, I think, almost 2 years earlier than other citizens of Europe. So a great example, this French ATU system. But the point which was made that regular or normal cost effectiveness models or HTA requirements cannot be applied as such to rare, ultra rare disease products, that's, I think, an emerging element which people start to understand now.
And of course, also, a lot of the sort of the health technology assessment discussions that take place are normally taking place about what's going on in the US, what's going on in Western Europe, whereas we know that there's a big push into the emerging markets. Shire, for example, I mean, that's a big thing that it's doing. What's actually happening when it comes to sort of these market access discussions about the emerging markets as sort of either the BRIC countries or even the sort of the beyond BRIC countries? I mean, are we sort of seeing similar sort of discussions in terms of allowing market access to these orphan drugs?
Well, I think maybe you want to take that one first, Theresa.
Sure. I mean, I have to say that I'm very encouraged that at least in the last 7 years that I've been involved in this area, that we have seen really good uptake by authorities in developing markets, that they're really making decisions to invest in these treatments. And it's both in, I would say, Eastern European countries, some who are in the EU and some who are not, as well as in Latin America. And in many of these emerging markets, actually, they have good economic growth, despite what's happening more broadly in the world. And we're quite encouraged that, yes, they are saying, patients with these diseases also deserve treatment, and so we're seeing good uptake of them. But beyond that, I think, and getting back to Hans' comment about access, I think that's a nice mechanism for early access, and I think, though, it's mostly to recognize the delays that are part of negotiating pricing and reimbursement. I would like to see fundamentally a real tackling of how orphan drugs or drugs for orphan diseases are fundamentally different, and to have a new framework. Mm-hmm. And I think it's encouraging that there are countries like England who are at the forefront of trying to figure this out. And then, I think we should look at how we can encourage using those same assessments and approaches much more broadly. We've seen it in other drug areas, but certainly not universal adoption. if I think we could, at some point, for example, in the EU, have universal approaching to pricing and reimbursement in a similar way that we have to marketing authorization approval, that would be, I think, very encouraging and would certainly speed up access for patients.
Well, I think one of the hallmarks of this area, again, is looking at what's being done best practice in certain areas, and certainly there are some great advances being made in England, and there are great advances being made in countries like France. And so one of the agreements between all of the governments when they signed up to the 2009 Council recommendation on rare diseases was actually to work together on the basis that there's no area in healthcare that lends itself more favorably to collaboration than the rare disease space. It was logical. If everything's scattered, it makes sense to bring it together. And one of the things that they want to do, and they've signed up to do, and they're busy working on, is this so-called clinical added value of orphan drugs, so the CAVOD. And the idea is that you would have a collaboration at the beginning of an orphan drugs marketing authorization process to bring together all that we do know about the drug. So not focusing on what we don't know, focusing on what we do know, which is actually quite a lot when we bring it all together at the time of marketing authorization. And having that report accompany the newly approved orphan drug into the member states, and then have a collaborative approach to follow-up measures. So knowing what we know, identifying what we don't know, and then figuring out a way on an ongoing basis to build up the knowledge set that will answer those as yet unanswered questions. So what that does is it takes away that binary yes-no decision, no, you can't have the drug, to turn it into you can have the drug, but on a collaborative basis, we have to build up more data, more knowledge, and so on. And that's a system that's actually in development right now. We're hoping to see some more news coming out of the European Union and the countries probably in the next 6 months. So, and I know that we'll be working together very closely on that with the other companies and the patients involved.
All right. Can you give us sort of an example of what disease or diseases they're going to focus on initially?
So it's going to, in principle, it's a system, so it's going to apply in principle to all orphan drugs. I understand that the intention now is to have 1, 2, or 3 pilot projects. I can imagine that there may be areas that are of more interest because of their therapeutic area, but it might be more interesting to run pilot projects on various different stages of the process. So to run a pilot project starting with an about to be approved therapy, to run a pilot project starting with the roadmap for the evidence development, and then to run a pilot project at the time of a reassessment of reimbursement based on what we know. So as I said, it's a system that's currently in development. We're all working very hard and very collaboratively on that with the payers as well as the governments and the other companies and the patients right at the center of it. So I hope very much that this autumn we'll be seeing some real concrete recommendations coming out of that, because it will be the culmination of years of work.
It's again a very nice example, this CAVOD initiative, of something which actually came through patient organization. Eurordis has played a key role in getting this off the ground. So again, this point which we are making throughout the roundtable is that this partnership model, this multi-stakeholder, small community, I would say, of companies and academic centers and big pharma and biotech and patient organizations, all together, you really can make a difference here. And this CAVOD initiative could be a really nice fruit as a result of that as well, where patients do play a key role.
So, and clearly in orphan diseases where, because it's small populations, and almost everybody, I mean, around the table, you guys have, all worked with each other at one time or another. It seems to be almost like that sort of that collegiate environment. Is this a sort of a potential model actually for the sort of the whole pharmaceutical industry as it moves forward? I mean, are all diseases going to be rare diseases because of our focus on actually understanding who gets affected, and therefore this is a nice model as we develop?
One could actually make that plea or make that statement very clearly, because you could say about Duchenne, it's one disease, But we're working now already on 6 compounds and more to follow on various subpopulations, each with their own genetic issue, you could say. I'm quite confident that many of our more common diseases eventually will become more rare diseases as well. And that's where perhaps the rare disease field could be a pioneer for future more common diseases as well, whether it's on pricing and reimbursement, whether it's the development pathways, or just on the fact how to collaborate with various stakeholders. I think rare diseases are in an ideal situation to make a difference there.
Absolutely, I thoroughly agree. I think hyperfragmentation, you're very likely to see quite what we consider now quite prevalent diseases. Actually, there's a wide spectrum of severity and symptoms, and it might not necessarily be that there is this mild to severe. It's actually that as our understanding grows and we look at treatment response, because often people think, okay, they're not responding to these treatments, we're giving them steroids, we're giving them these other sort of immunosuppressants, patients are not responding. Actually, it might turn out those are not. They don't have the same disease, that's why they're not responding.